Welcome to Politico's Writing the Rules of Crypto. Please join me in welcoming Marty Cady, Editorial Director of Subscriptions at Politico.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marty Cady, Politico's Editorial Director for Subscriptions. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us for today's event, Writing the Rules of Crypto, which will be moderated by Morning Money's co-author, Sam Sutton. Thanks, as always, to all of you joining on the live stream as well. Today, we're going to dive into how federal regulators, members of Congress, and the White House are seeking to write the rules of digital currencies, including stablecoins. This editorial conversation will also cover tax implications of crypto and the geopolitical factors that the U.S. is taking into account as it begins to draw regulatory frameworks for crypto. If you follow our discussion on stage, be sure to join the conversation on social media on Twitter using the hashtag PoliticoTech. It's hashtag PoliticoTech if you want to ask questions and discuss this event on Twitter. Before we kick it off, I'd like to thank Ripple, the sponsor of today's event. And joining us now for a sponsored executive conversation is Politico's Senior Vice President for Consumer Business, Callie Bowdy, and Ripple's General Counsel, Stu Alderoty. Callie and Stu, come up on stage.
Thank you so much, Marty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here in person, and to those of you who are joining us online for the Writing the Rules of Crypto to hear from all of our fantastic speakers today. I'd also like to thank our sponsor Ripple, for their support and partnership in today's conversation. Ahead of our editorial panel, I'm delighted to sit down now for a business conversation with Stu Alderoty, the General Counsel at Ripple. In case you're not familiar with them, Ripple's a digital payment network focused on enabling easier financial transactions across the globe. With this mission at the center of their business, Stu has been a leader in redefining our collective understanding of cryptocurrency's role in breaking down economic borders and a vocal advocate for policy changes to continue enabling the successful rise of crypto's impact on the financial services industry. Stu, I'm excited to have this conversation today.
Me too.
We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. But before we do, can you tell us a little bit about Ripple and specifically what makes Ripple unique in the crypto space?
Sure. So Ripple, next month in October, is going to celebrate its 10th year anniversary. It's grown from 3 founders to 700 employees. We're a global company. We're headquartered in San Francisco, but we have offices in New York, Singapore, London, Ireland, Dubai, Brazil. I'm sure I've forgotten a few. And what Ripple does, and I think it's unique, is we marry the promise of blockchain and the promise of crypto to create what our founder calls the Internet of Value. Just like information moves seamlessly, we want value to move seamlessly. And the first problem case that we've tackled, and I think we've tackled very successfully, is cross-border remittances. How do you move money from one country to the other and have that conversion take place in near real time in a transparent way where you know what the cost is going to be before the transaction takes place. Our customers are financial institutions, payment providers, and banks, enterprises. We're not consumer facing, but we've helped facilitate them make high volume, low dollar remittances. So if you have a nurse whose family is in the Philippines, but she's working outside of the Philippines, and she wants to send money back home bi-weekly, we think that our solution provides the fastest, cheapest, and more transparent way to do that. This year, we will have over $10 billion in value has been transferred over our rails. An incredibly successful company, and I think we're just getting started.
So to set the stage for our conversation, what do you want still skeptical consumers and policymakers to understand about the promise of crypto? And can you discuss how Ripple's next generation of payment systems is helping to create a world without economic borders?
So, when people ask me that question or some form of that question in terms of what is the promise of crypto and what is the promise of blockchain, number one, we talk about Ripple because we have a real use case that enterprise customers are deploying throughout the world, breaking down barriers and bringing in financial inclusion. Ripple itself, I think ultimately we will be known as crypto for business, because I think institutions are going to lean in more and more to the crypto use case, and we want Ripple to be the one-stop shop for enterprises and institutions that are interested in crypto. In terms of the future of crypto, that's sort of like asking what the future of the internet was going to be in 1995. I don't think anybody really knows. And I think if they try to give you their best guess, they're probably going to be wrong. What I do know is that crypto is here to stay. It is the future. If you don't understand it, you're not alone, but you probably didn't understand the internet to the extent you were alive in 1995 or 1996. You probably can't explain the internet today, but you know it's something you can't live without. And I think of crypto and blockchain as a tool that will improve lives on a very personal level. How that manifests itself, I think, is really up to the geniuses and the entrepreneurs who really, the engineers, the coders, who really know how the inner workings of this technology function.
Now, Stu, we were talking earlier about the fact that you recently wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal questioning the SEC's approach to the crypto market for not providing sufficient clarity over crypto regulation. Can you elaborate on that a bit and explain why you believe the current crypto regulatory approach actually does more harm than good?
Yeah. So that since December of 2020, and that's an important day because the SEC filed a lawsuit against Ripple in December 2020, we have not signed a single US customer to our platform, but in the past 2 years, we've had the strongest years ever as a company. That $10 billion in volume mostly is driven offshore. And by the way, this is all done compliant with anti-money laundering laws, OFAC laws, anti-sanction laws, et cetera. Why is that? Why haven't we signed a single US customer in the past 2 years? Because of regulatory uncertainty and really regulatory hostility. So the piece that I wrote in the Wall Street Journal was in response to an op-ed that our current chair of the SEC wrote, Gary Gensler, where he announced that the SEC was going to be the cop on the beat for crypto. Well, I don't remember anyone holding an election for the cop on the beat for crypto. I don't remember Congress appointing Gary Gensler as the cop on the beat for crypto. So I wrote an editorial basically saying you can't self-appoint yourself as the cop on a beat for crypto. And what really is happening here in the US, because we have such regulatory uncertainty and outright regulatory hostility through what we call regulation by enforcement, compared to sophisticated economic centers like Singapore, like London, like Dubai. What we're doing here in the US, and I think principally through the SEC as an institution, is we're elevating politics and power over sound policy. And in doing that, you're not only hurting innovation and innovators and entrepreneurs like Ripple, and I won't name others, but there's others under attack in the space in the US, that ultimately you're hurting the retail holder of this asset. 1 in 5 Americans have either hold, own, or have interacted with crypto. And that uncertainty ultimately hurts them. So when you hear the chair of the SEC saying, I'm doing this all in the name of consumer protection, actually, it's the very opposite. It's the consumer that's getting hurt. The day the SEC sued Ripple, the digital asset that we rely upon to effectuate the cross-border transactions, XRP, was delisted or suspended from trading from nearly every US platform in the US, and $15 billion in market cap volume was erased. Did Ripple get hurt? Our business moved offshore. Who got hurt? The men and women who owned XRP in the US, who've been locked out of their accounts and can't access XRP in the US. If I could just give one more example. In Gary Gensler's editorial, he talked about a settlement with BlockFi, a lending platform, and what a great success that was. What happened? They settled with BlockFi, And they said, if you want to be a lending platform, you have to come in and register with the SEC. For those who are paying attention, we kind of all knew there was no path to registration with the SEC because the regulatory framework wasn't there. And the SEC assessed a $100 million fine. Shortly thereafter, BlockFi was not able to make the first $10 million down payment on the $100 million fine. They went on the auction block. They were sold. 2 other companies with similar business models quickly went bankrupt. And the consumers who had funds on those platforms were left holding the bag in bankruptcy court. That does, at the end, so that was the response in the Wall Street Journal to what Gary Gensler, basically calling him out, saying, stop invoking consumer protection. Stop invoking integrity of the markets. You're hurting the consumer. Regulatory uncertainty creates havoc in the marketplace. What we need is clarity.
So talk about that a little bit. What exactly do they need to do, these policymakers, to give clarity or to actually give more certainty overall to the crypto industry?
So there's 3 ways you can get clarity. The first way is through regulatory rulemaking, where regulators, they publish rules, market participants weigh in and comment on those rules, and then you have rules moving forward. The markets regulators in this country have shown no willingness to do that in the crypto space. And I think they've shown no willingness to do that in the crypto space intentionally because they like the uncertainty, because the uncertainty gives them the power. So we're not seeing anything on the regulatory rulemaking front. The second way you can get clarity is through legislation. And there are a number of bills that are working their way through Congress now to see if we can kind of clean up this mess that's been created in the US. You have to be careful, though, because this is a very complicated space. And if you legislate without really understanding what it is you're legislating, and if you don't get those definitions right about what is a security or what's a commodity, you actually can create more confusion through bad legislation. But I think there's a lot of good faith efforts that are going on right now, and we spend a lot of time with policymakers educating them. And then the third way you can get clarity is through litigation. And we are defending the case that the SEC filed against Ripple, and we've said this since day one. We're defending it not only on behalf of Ripple, we're defending it on behalf of the entire industry. And we think that our case will provide I'll strike the word favorable, will provide clarity in terms of how to define a digital asset. And the fundamental question is a digital asset regulated as a security, or is it regulated as a commodity or a virtual currency? We think it's regulated as it should be regulated as a commodity or virtual currency, and there's a lot of substantive reasons why that's the case. And so ultimately, I think the clarity may come from the litigation process, which would be unfortunate, but hopefully we can get legislative clarity as well.
So then how would we be able to create a system that protects and empowers the more than 40 million Americans who are a part of this new crypto economy? Are there specifics within the regulatory and policy perspective that you'd like to see happen in the US?
Yeah, so I think a threshold point here that needs to be made and sometimes gets lost in all of the noise is I think the adults in the room in this space are not asking to be free of regulation. We don't want to operate in the Wild West. We're asking for regulation, but we're asking for clear regulation. Clear regulation, consistently applied, leads to predictable results, and that's what we need. But in terms of specifics, what we need is a faithful application of the existing laws. And the SEC, although they say we're just applying the law, really what they're seeking to do is through regulation by enforcement, remake the law. An independent agency or any agency doesn't have the authority to remake the law. Only Congress has the authority to remake the law. But ultimately what we need is a clear definition of what is a security and what is not a security. And the law kind of already gives that. The 1933 Securities Act, I'll get a little legal wonky here, says the Securities and Exchange Commission, and it's right in their name, securities, they only have jurisdiction over securities. It provides a definition, a list of those things that are a security. Traditional stocks and bonds, you own a right, title, or interest in a company through a share, a debt instrument, a note, and in that laundry list, there's something called an investment contract. And what Gary Gensler says, or what the SEC says, I don't want to make this personalized to Gary Gensler, but what the institution is saying is that if you buy an asset and you hope that asset rises in value so you can trade it in the secondary market, that falls under my jurisdiction. And that's not the case, because if it were the case, if I were to sell you a bar of gold, or if I sell you a bucket of soybeans, or if I were to sell you an Andy Warhol lithograph, and then I were to go out and to promote Andy Warhol lithographs under the SEC's theory, if you can sell that Andy Warhol lithograph, or you hope to sell it at a higher price and I sold it to you, that's a security. It's not. What you need is an investment contract, which means you need a contract for an investment. A right, title, or interest in the entity that is selling you the asset. There has to be some post-sale obligation. After I sell you that Andy Warhol lithograph, I have to be contractually obligated to you or make some promise to you that I'm going to do something on your behalf that you can hold me accountable for if I don't do it. That is a security, and most cryptos don't fall under that definition. That's an asset, and it's probably an asset that trades in a spot secondary market, and that's more of a traditional world of commodities that falls under the CFTC's jurisdiction.
We are running out of time here, so
Yeah.
we're going to do a bit of a lightning round if that's okay. You talked about predictable results, but there's also been a lot of instability in the market recently with the collapse of major cryptocurrency hedge funds and some major losses to consumers. Do you think the collapse could have been avoided? Does this provide evidence of systemic risk in the crypto industry?
I don't think so. I think this is not the first crypto winter. It won't be the last crypto winter. I think we're going to, we'll continue to see volatility in the market. The market, after all, is a fairly young market. I think the pricing of crypto assets has proven to be correlated as a group and then correlated to the broader market to some extent. Could some of it have been avoided? Perhaps some of the bankruptcies that I talked about earlier could have been avoided if the regulator didn't simply go in and enforce in a way that they knew there was no way for the target of that enforcement to comply, but rather worked and said, look, if you're going to offer a lending platform or offer a lending product that seems to have unrealistic returns, let's create consumer protection guardrails, because at the end of the day, all regulation should have three basic principles: protect consumers, protect the integrity of the market, and to the best we can, keep bad actors out of the system.
All right, we have time for one more question. It's a long one. U.S. policymakers aren't the only ones navigating this new market. And of all the different national approaches to regulating crypto, which one would you say constitutes a real paradigm for the crypto industry? What would the U.S. need to do to work towards that similar regulatory approach? And finally, what do you want policymakers and regulators to keep top of mind as they consider policy regulations affecting the crypto industry?
In the minute I have left.
Yeah.
So I think I'll point to Singapore, because what Singapore has done is they have provided, they said, look, here's a clear licensing framework if you want to operate a payment service business in Singapore. The bar's really, really high. If you have to meet all of the requirements, you're going to be subject to oversight and you're going to be subject to audit. But once you meet those requirements, you can operate your business. That's a sound, to me, that feels like a pretty sound approach. And it's something I think that can be duplicated in the U.S. The U.S., we have a unique problem because we don't have a unitary regulatory system. We have, probably at least 7 or 8 regulators that claim some jurisdiction over crypto. And then lastly, what do I want policymakers to know? I think just sort of maybe to end with what I begin with. Crypto's here to stay. You're not going to be able to kill it. If you try to kill it, it's going to move, and the technology, the innovation, the entrepreneurship will move offshore. So stop trying to over-regulate, and let's get some clear regulation. And the first step of clear regulation is public-private partnership. Let's get educated.
Stu, thank you so much again for joining me, and thank you to Ripple for your partnership on today's conversation. With that, I am thrilled to welcome our moderator, Sam Sutton, and our fantastic panel of speakers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.